Yeah, so I'm Craig Mills. I am the founder of this 20 Recaps project, and I currently am in New York. I'm sorry, in New Orleans, but I live in New York City. I've been there for most of my adult life. I work in nonprofit management, consulting with education and nonprofit organizations, and I am looking forward to telling my story. Shall I start?
Please, go right ahead.
Okay. So I want to start off by saying that the 20 incidents that I am going to discuss are only a small portion of the incidents that of this nature that I've encountered. As I started listing these down without scratching my brain, I came up with 44 and I had to edit them down. But I think the ones that I have selected represent a nice composite of some of these MDRs that I've experienced throughout my life. And I don't have a lot of conscious memories about incidents that happened before high school, maybe because I wasn't so aware of it, or maybe because I tended to be more around Black people who weren't expressing such thoughts to me. But as I got into later middle school and high school is when I started noticing these things. But I'm going to start off in high school. So the incident number one that I have is it was a regular occurrence in high school. My high school was predominantly Mexican American in San Antonio, Texas. And I had one student named Danny in particular who was then and still now morbidly obese, but he found it completely acceptable to bully me and say that I had big lips and to make gestures with his face and an exaggerated feature to suggest that this was how I looked. He would do this pretty regularly. I would say it happened at least once a month or so in class, and I just found it embarrassing and humiliating. Number two was also in high school. I was on the tennis team, and I had a friend of mine who told me that I needed to smile at night so that people could see me. And a statement like that is something that happened regularly. That happened to me in college as well. But the first time I remember it being said to me was in high school. Number three takes place at college at Trinity University, private liberal arts college in San Antonio. This is my sophomore year. One night I walked into the room of two friends of mine. It was a Saturday night. We were all planning to go out for the evening. I went down to their room. The door to their room was open, and one of the roommates, named Steve, was in the bathroom. He had the door open and he was talking to the people that were in their room already. So when I walked in, he didn't hear me come in. And apparently some of them had been in San Antonio that day and it had an incident with a Black man. And so that's what they were discussing when I came into the room. And from the bathroom, Steve said with venom, "And did you hear that fucking nigger, what he said to me?" And the room went silent. And then he came out and he realized that I was in the room at this point. He tried to apologize, but our friendship took a turn to being pretty non-existent after that. Number four also takes place in college. I had a white female friend from suburban Minneapolis who used to regularly tell me that I was an Oreo, meaning I was Black on the outside, white on the inside, or that I was pasty, or that I wasn't a brother because I didn't fit her conception of what a Black man should be and how he should act. Number five takes place in college. This was the summer of my junior to senior year. I lived in Alamo Heights, which is a wealthy white suburb of San Antonio that is fully surrounded by the city and near my college campus. One day I had gone to the grocery store and I was walking home on the main street, which is Broadway, to my apartment. And then all of a sudden I noticed a police car following me. and they just continued to follow me as I walked. They never got out to ask me anything or say anything to me, but followed me, and they followed me until I got to my apartment. And once I went inside, they didn't approach me or say anything, but it was just disturbing to have a car trailing me for no apparent reason. Number six takes place in college, but in the summer. This was in Dallas, Texas. A friend of mine from college had invited me to his parents' home for the weekend, and we went to his parents' country club to play tennis. Well, one of the members went to complain to someone who worked there, as I'm assuming a membership manager or whomever, because he was disturbed that I was playing tennis. He thought either that I worked there or that I shouldn't be working or that I shouldn't be playing tennis. And it was interesting because the most of the attendants who worked in the locker rooms and served food were all Black. So it was a custom that they were used to seeing people serve them, but not being engaged with them socially. Incident number seven was after college. So one summer, I think it was in the summer, a white female friend of mine and I were driving to Atlanta from New Orleans to visit another college friend of ours. I was driving the car, and on the highway in Alabama, I passed a police officer who was driving in the right lane at about 30 miles an hour. So I passed him, but I wasn't speeding. And then after I passed him, he pulled me over. And when he came to the window and I opened it with this heavy Southern accent, he said to me, "Son, don't you know it's disrespectful to pass an officer in these parts?" And I informed him that I wasn't speeding. And he looked over and saw my friend, a college friend of mine, and he asked her repeatedly if she was okay. She told him yes. I don't know if she fully understood then what was going on, but I understood it and realized that I wasn't in a position to exert any sort of authority or agency over my freedoms at that moment. It was a disturbing and informative experience for me. Number eight was, I label it as interpersonal, but it wasn't someone that I knew. When I moved to the Philadelphia area, originally I lived in the suburbs in a town, Collingswood, New Jersey, which is about 15 minutes on a high-speed line from Philadelphia. One night I was walking home from the train station to my apartment, and I saw a group of, they looked to be high school boys against a building. One of them was sitting on the ground and he was crying, and it looked like his other friends were trying to console him. I looked in their direction, and the one who was crying looked up to me and yelled at me. He's like, "What the fuck are you looking at, nigger?" And I just kept walking. I said, I don't want to get involved. I don't know what their issue is, but that was I didn't know them at all, never seen them, but that was the response that he thought was appropriate to ask me. Number nine takes place in a commercial setting. This was in Philadelphia. I had gone to a Gap store to buy a shirt, and as I was walking around the store shopping, I noticed a security guard following me. And it made me extremely uncomfortable because when you know that someone's watching you, it's just hard to relax. And so at one moment, I thought of leaving the store, but then I thought that that would validate the assumption that I was there to steal something. So I picked out a shirt and I bought it. And then I wrote a letter to the Gap to tell them about this humiliating experience that I had, but they never responded to it. I wasn't sure if I expected them to, but they didn't. And I'm sure that I wasn't the only person that a security guard had followed around that store. Number 10 is a travel experience. One year I had a Euro pass and I was on the train traveling from Copenhagen to Oslo to visit a friend. The train was crowded. Someone sat next to me and we were having a good conversation, just talking about me being an American, about traveling and whatnot. And then when we got to the Swedish border, the police came on and asked everyone for the ID. So I showed my ID. As I said, the train was crowded. When I gave him my ID, the police demanded that I open my bags. I was the only person on the train whose bags that they checked. So everyone was watching, and I had to open all my bags and empty them out, and for them to rifle through. And it was again a humiliating experience because I was the only Black person on the train, and I was the only one that they stopped. And then on this same train, when I got to Copenhagen, I'm sorry, when I got to Oslo, I got off the train and immediately two policemen came up to ask me for my ID to question me on why I was there. Fortunately, my friend who I was going to visit was meeting me at the train station. He saw what was going on. He came over and he started talking to them in Norwegian, and I could tell he was pretty agitated. And whatever he said, they left me alone. But had he not been there, I don't know how much longer they would have detained me or what they would have tried to insinuate that I was doing in Oslo. Number 11 is professional. So I had applied for a job as an editor at an academic journal in New York City. And when I went for the interview, the woman who interviewed me said she was the owner of the publishing company and she was German. She was very condescending. She was polite but condescending, asking me how I became interested in English. I thought that was interesting and ironic, seeing that it wasn't her primary language, but it was something that I thought that I was pretty good at. And throughout the interview, she continued to ask me patronizing questions, and I was convinced that she wasn't going to take my candidacy seriously. Needless to say, I never received a job offer or a follow-up interview from this publisher. Number 12 is housing in New York City. When I had first moved to New York, I was looking for apartments and I called up a realtor about an apartment that was in the Dumbo section of Brooklyn. And Dumbo is now this really well-developed, expensive area, but it wasn't nearly as expensive as it is now. But when I called the agent, we talked about the apartment. He told me that it was available. We made an appointment for later that afternoon for me to see the apartment. And when we met, once he saw me, he told me, he was polite about it, but he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we just rented that apartment out." And of course, my suspicions went up, but I had no way to prove any of this. But it was apparent that he didn't want me to have the apartment because I'm Black. Number 13 is sexual. So once I was having sex with a white Canadian, and without any warning or provocation, they reached over into the nightstand and pulled out a measuring tape and started measuring my penis. It was pretty shocking and alarming. I don't want to dwell on it for a long extended period, but I've also had other incidents where people have wanted to photograph in various sexual positions, which, you know, it there are a lot of inferences that one can make from incidents like these. Number 14 is housing. So an apartment that I did end up renting at one point, I got because the mother of an ex-roommate lived in this apartment and she wanted to move. And I was looking for a place. And so she told her landlord that I was her son's friend or ex-roommate, and that I was interested in the apartment. So my future landlord and I did everything over phone and by fax at that time. The day after I moved in, my landlord showed up. So I was meeting her for the first time. And when I opened the door, she gasped audibly because she didn't expect me to be Black. And her reaction said a lot. We wound up having a great landlord lessee relationship, but it was a little jarring at first when she saw me. Right. Number 15 is professional. All right. Number 15 is professional. So at one point, I worked at a company called Edison Schools, which at its peak was the largest charter management organization in the country. And a lot of people who worked there eventually went on to grad school, as did I. And the year that I was about to start grad school, there were a group of about 10 to 12 different people that were about to go to professional school. One woman was going to get a master's in education. We had a company kitchen in our office, and one day we were in there, and she was lamenting that she didn't have enough financial aid to pay for her education. And so I suggested to her that she reach out to the financial aid office and ask for more money. And I said, I did this. I originally had a 25% scholarship, and I wrote and I asked, and they gave me more money. There were about 8 or 10 people in the kitchen. And on reflex, she says, "Oh, that's because you're a minority." And I asked her, I said, so, and she and I, we didn't work closely together. We just worked in the same organization. We weren't in the same department. So I asked her if she knew anything about my academic background or my professional background or how I did on my GRE scores. And she didn't. I said, but you found it acceptable to make an assumption like that based on my skin color and nothing alone. She, of course, felt offended or hurt that I accused her of something, but it seems to be the pattern that when someone says something to you, then it should be incumbent upon you to make them feel better, even if they're the ones who put you in the uncomfortable situation to begin with. Number 16 is also professional. So I did 2 master's degrees programs back to back. And the second one I did was at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia while I was working at the Ford Foundation in New York. And so 1 or 2 days a week, I would have to go down to Philadelphia for class. So I arranged with my manager to come in early on those days and leave a little earlier so I could take the train. And as I told one member on my grant making team about my new work schedule and that I was in grad school, his first question to me was, "Are you going to Temple," which is Temple University in Philadelphia? Because he had the assumption that I either wasn't academically qualified to go to University of Pennsylvania. He went to UPenn to get his MBA, so he thought of himself in this certain caliber of education and academic training that wouldn't be something that would be accessible to me. So he expressed surprise when I told him that I was going to UPenn. And the irony of it is he went to Oberlin College for undergrad, and I also was accepted there. He never knew that, but apparently I was academically qualified to go to the same schools that he attended, but he seemed to think that my academic or intellectual capacity wasn't going to permit me to be in a school that he had attended. Number 17 is medical. So I have a slight heart murmur that has never caused me any issues. I actually didn't find out about it until late in adulthood. But my primary care physician recommended one year that I see a cardiologist in his specialty just to have it examined. And so on the day of my appointment, when the cardiologist came in, he said hello to me and pretty much nothing else throughout the entire procedure. It was just a very pro forma exam that he conducted. And then he got up to leave, and I asked him if everything was okay with me. And then he said yes. And he still continued to the door. And I asked him, I said, don't you think that I deserve a little bit more? I said, you just spent 30 minutes putting this cold gel on me and looking at these diagnostics, and you're just walking out of the room. And he's like, well, yeah, everything is fine. And it was one of these instances where you realize how, as a Black person, people treat you in the medical profession. I often wondered, I told my primary care physician about this experience when I saw him again, and how unpleasant it was. And he apologized for him, but I said, yeah, it wasn't you, it was him. And it was just baffling why he wouldn't offer me any assessment of my heart and my physical condition after he had just finished examining me. But this is what happens to people at when they interact in the medical profession. Number 18 is professional. This is also at the Ford Foundation. I worked there for 7 years. My last year, I worked in a different unit, and I had a manager who was very patronizing, would treat me like a child. She would even call me sweetie, which I had to tell her a couple of times was inappropriate for a lot of reasons. And she would talk over me. So once she and I were having a meeting in her office, and I was talking, and she literally began to speak at a regular volume over me to silence me. And so I asked her if she wanted me to just go back to my office, and then she could call me on the phone and lecture me or tell me what it is that she wanted to tell me if she didn't want to listen to me. And it was not long after that that I had made a decision that it was time for me to move on from this organization. Number 19 is also medical. When I used to play tennis before I would go to work, this was when I was still at the Ford Foundation. And one particular morning, I sprained my ankle really badly. And when I went to work, I went to go see the nurse because we had a nurse on staff. And she suggested that I should probably go to the emergency room because she thought that my ankle might be broken. So I went to the emergency room, and the doctor began to question me as I was waiting. I went in for a sprained ankle, and he started asking me about my sexual history and if I had venereal diseases. And he could tell by the look on my face that I was puzzled and somewhat taken aback by his questions, because those had nothing to do with the reason that I was there. And and then I think he started talking about there were a lot of uninsured patients that had come in. And I said, but that's not my situation. I said, I'm here for my ankle. So I wish that we could keep our questions to that. And again, it shows some of the assumptions that people make in the medical profession. I've had other experiences with doctors that I've met at social events, talking about some of these issues and why it is that Black people in particular tend to have worse health outcomes because of the treatment they receive from medical professionals. Number 20 is a run-in with the police that was, on a personal level, the most disturbing for me. So this was in 2011 at the height of stop and frisk in New York City. Michael Bloomberg was mayor, and the numbers at that year, the number of stop and frisks had peaked at about 800,000. Well, one night I was riding my bike on Central Park West, so it's on the outside of Central Park. I was biking north, and then an unmarked car, to me it was unmarked, was heading south, swerved across the street. Two big burly men jumped out and told me to get off of my bike. It was around 2 a.m. There was no one else around, and I didn't know what was about to happen to me. I thought I was about to be mugged, assaulted, or worse. And so I was near the entrance or near an entrance to the park. So I was trying to make a momentary decision about what to do, if I should try to stay on my bike and escape into the park to get away from them. And right as I was about to do that, I saw what looked to be a police dog collar around one of these men's necks. So I stayed, and they asked me for my ID. So I gave them my ID, and then one of them told me that I asked him why they stopped me, and he told me that there were a rash of car break-ins in this area. Well, it was a hot summer night. It was ironically the early wee hours following my birthday, and I'd gone out for a big dinner, and it was hot. I couldn't sleep, and I just wanted to exercise. So I had on a tank top and gym shorts. And so I was incredulous about the reason that they stopped me, because anything that they presumed that I might have been trying to steal from cars, I had nowhere to put it, and I had no instrument to break into the cars. Well, the whole incident wound up being completely unsatisfactory because I filed a police report about it, a complaint about being stopped. And after an investigation, they determined that the police were within their rights to stop me. And the only thing that they cited them for was not having written a report of stopping me. So if I had not filed the report, that actual stop would never have been recorded. So that's a sample of the incidents that I have selected. As I said earlier, that is only a portion of them. As I started thinking about these incidents and writing them and recording them, other ones came to mind. But I wanted to hold myself to 20 because that's the theme of what we're doing. But I also want people to understand that these incidents happen everywhere geographically. They happen in every sector of our personal, professional, and social lives. And that it is so deeply rooted in our system that some of them just happen without even a second thought. And these are the things that I want people to be conscious of when they start examining their own implicit and explicit biases and how to address some of the systemic structures in our society.